the story does not begin in the gaslit cafés of Paris, but in the sun-baked, wormwood-rich hills of the Wilde Traverse, Switzerland. In the late 18th century, a French doctor named Pierre Ordinaire, an exile from the Revolution, peddled a curious, bitter tonic through the countryside. It was a distillation of Artemisia absinthium, grand wormwood, along with anise, fennel, hyssop, and other herbs. This extract d'absinthe was a panacea, a cure-all for everything from worms and menstrual pains to lethargy. It was medicinal, foul, and powerfully alcoholic. The recipe found its way to a savvy entrepreneur, Henri Louis Pernod. In 1805, seeing potential beyond the apothecary's shelf, he established the first commercial absinthe distillery in the French town of Pontarlier, just across the Swiss border. The Pernod Fils brand was born, producing a viridescent liquor of startling clarity and potency, usually around 68% alcohol by volume, or 136 proof. But absinthe's true conscription into legend began not with artists, but with soldiers. During France's brutal colonial wars in Algeria in the 1840s and 50s, army doctors prescribed absinthe to troops as a febrifuge, a preventative for malaria and dysentery. The bitter, anise-flavored fire was mixed with water from canteens, creating the milky, opalescent louche that would become its signature. Soldiers returned to Paris as heroes, their taste for la verte, the green one, intact. It was a drink of endurance, of exotic campaigns, of masculine fortitude. The government, recognizing its role in the soldiers' health, even increased their absinthe ration. But in the rapidly modernizing, socially fractured Paris of the Second Empire, 1852–1870, absinthe underwent a metamorphosis. The Industrial Revolution created a new class of bourgeois capitalists and a vast, disaffected urban proletariat. For the former, absinthe became a sophisticated ritual, the elixir verte, the green hour, that twilight period between 5 and 7 p.m. where men of affairs would unwind. The ritual was precise. A special slotted spoon holding a sugar cube was placed over a glass containing a shot of the emerald spirit. Iced water dripped slowly from a carafe over the sugar, dissolving it and diluting the absinthe, which clouded into a hypnotic, perfumed opal. Yet it was in the sprawling Bohemian enclaves of Montmartre and the Latin Quarter that absinthe found its soul and its notoriety. As Paris was gutted and rebuilt by Baron Haussmann into wide boulevards, displacing the poor and homogenizing the city, artists, writers, and radicals retreated to the cheap, crumbling corners. They rejected bourgeois morality, seeking new forms of expression in an age of scientific discovery and spiritual uncertainty. And they found a muse in absinthe. It was more than a drink. It was an identity, nicknamed La Fée Verte, the Green Fairy. It was ascribed near mythical properties. It wasn't merely intoxicating, it was stimulating. Wine and beer dulled the senses, but absinthe, its devotees claimed, sharpened the mind, loosened the imagination, and bestowed a lucid drunkenness perfect for creative work. It was the antithesis of the slow, bloated drunk of the proletariat's cheap wine. It was cerebral, artistic, dangerous. The chemical agent of this supposed clarity was thujone, a compound found in wormwood in high doses. Thujone is a convulsant, a neurotoxin. But in the doses present in even the strongest historical absinthes, its psychoactive effects were likely minimal compared to the monumental alcohol content. The true power of absinthe was psychological, a self-fulfilling prophecy of altered states. One drank expecting inspiration, madness, and vision, and often one found it. To understand absinthe's grip on the artistic soul of fin de siècle Paris, one must step into the smoky, raucous world of the café. Establishments like the Café de la Nouvelle Athènes in Place Pigalle or the Lapin Agile in Montmartre became the laboratories of modern art, and on every table, in every poet's hand, glowed that distinctive green glass. Edouard Manet captured its solitary ritual in his 1859 painting, The Absinthe Drinker, a lonely, top-hatted man leaning against a wall, a glass of absinthe at his feet. The painting was rejected by the Paris Salon for its vulgar subject matter. It wasn't heroic. It was a portrait of modern alienation. A generation later, Edgar Degas would refine this theme in his masterpiece, L'Absinthe, 1876. A man and woman, models from the artist's circle, sit morosely before a glass of the milky green liquid. Their postures speak of exhaustion, despair, and disconnect. The painting scandalized London when exhibited there, seen as a documentary indictment of French depravity. Here was absinthe not as a creative spark, but as an anesthetic for the soul. But for others, the green fairy was a vigorous, if demanding, lover. Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, the aristocratic dwarf who immortalized the dancers and prostitutes of Montmartre, was its most famous devotee. He carried a hollow cane filled with absinthe and was known to start his day with a breakfast of the stuff. His art, with its exaggerated perspectives, bold lines, and evocative shadows, seems to pulse with the distorted perception of the absinthe high. He even created a special cocktail, the Tremblement de Terre Earthquake, a brutal mix of absinthe and cognac. The poets were even more vocal in their devotion. Paul Verlaine and Arthur Rimbaud, the destructive, visionary duo who tore poetry from its classical moorings, fueled their chaotic, passionate relationship with rivers of absinthe. Rimbaud, in his A Season in Hell, wrote of systematic derangement of all the senses as a path to the unknown, a project for which absinthe was the perfect corrosive tool. Verlaine, in A Fog of Absinthe and Jealousy, would famously shoot Rimbaud in the wrist. The courtroom testimony was a spectacle of bohemian debauchery, with absinthe at its center. But But the most potent literary symbol came from abroad. Oscar Wilde, during his Parisian exile after his imprisonment, described its effects with decadent precision. The first stage is like ordinary drinking. The second, when you begin to see monstrous and cruel things. But if you can persevere, you will enter in upon the third stage, where you see things that you want to see, wonderful, curious things. This three-stage progression, euphoria, hallucination, transcendence, became the entrenched mythology of the drink. In the visual arts, no one made absinthe more iconic than Vincent van Gogh. Though he drank it heavily, along with other alcohols, his relationship with it is shrouded in myth. The persistent tale that he cut off his ear during an absinthe-fueled psychosis is more dramatic simplification than proven fact. Yet, his palate seems infused with its spirit. The swirling, feverish skies of starry night, the vibrating, sun-drenched yellows of the Arles paintings, the intense, almost toxic greens, all resonate with the sensory heightening ascribed to the fairy. He painted still life with absinthe in 1887, a quiet testament to its presence in his life. For Van Gogh, absinthe was perhaps less a muse and more a desperate form of self-medication for his profound mental anguish, an attempt to quiet the turmoil that alcohol only deepened. The most stunning artistic tribute, however, is Pablo Picasso's 1901 painting, The Absinthe Drinker. In his early blue period style, it shows a woman hunched over a glass, her face etched with loneliness, the green glass a focal point of cold light. More tellingly, in 1914, he created a series of 6 nearly identical bronze sculptures of an absinthe glass, each with a real perforated silver spoon and a painted sugar cube. He even sculpted the louche effect in the glass. It was a cubist deconstruction of the ritual itself, elevating a fleeting moment of daily bohemian life into high art. Absinthe was no longer just a subject, it was an aesthetic object, a symbol of an entire way of life. This artistic canonization, however, was a double-edged sword. While it glamorized the drink for the avant-garde, it also provided potent ammunition for its enemies. The images of despair, madness, and social decay painted by Degas and Picasso, the reckless lives of the poets, the tragic figure of Van Gogh, all were collected by the growing temperance movement as evidence not of artistic truth, but of moral and physical poison. As the 19th century waned, absinthe began its dramatic slide from chic bohemian sacrament to public enemy number 1. Its demographic had shifted. No longer the preserve of soldiers or artists, it had become the daily addiction of the French working class. By the 1870s and 80s, the price had dropped due to mass production and competition from inferior, often adulterated brands. Cheap absinthe flooded the bistros of industrial suburbs. The elixir verte was now the worker's reward for a grueling 12-hour day. But the context was different. The artist might drink one or two carefully prepared glasses in a cafe, seeking cerebral stimulation. The laborer, exhausted and malnourished, often drank it quickly, neat, or poorly diluted, seeking oblivion. The devastating effects of chronic, heavy alcoholism, liver disease, neurological damage, psychosis, poverty, violence, were now laid at the feet of this one distinctive drink. A new disease was coined, absinthism. Distinguished from ordinary alcoholism, it was described by doctors as a more severe, hallucinatory, and violent affliction. Symptoms included insomnia, tremors, paralysis, terrifying hallucinations, and convulsions. The medical establishment, led by figures like Dr. Valentin Magnin, published studies claiming wormhoods, thujone, attacked the brain differently than ethanol, causing rapid degeneration. Magnin's experiments, which involved exposing animals to pure wormwood oil vapor, not consumed absinthe, were flawed but influential. They provided a scientific basis for the panic. The press eagerly amplified this. Sensational stories proliferated. A man who, after drinking absinthe, murdered his wife and children. Another who threw himself from a window, believing he could fly. The drink was dubbed the assassin of the working man. Cartoons depicted the green fairy as a skeletal hag, dragging men to ruin. The narrative was powerful and simple. Wine was French, traditional, wholesome, and moderate. Absinthe was foreign, Swiss, modern, toxic, and led to excess. These battle lines were drawn along deep social and political fissures. The conservative, Catholic, rural France, the France of wine, saw absinthe as a symptom of everything wrong with modern, secular, urban life. The wine industry, a powerful economic and political lobby suffering from phylloxera blight that had devastated vineyards, saw a strategic opportunity. If they could destroy their competitor, they could regain market share. They funded anti-absinthe propaganda and lobbied politicians relentlessly. The Dreyfus Affair, 1894-1906, which tore France apart over anti-Semitism and national identity, also played a role. Many of the artistic and intellectual defenders of Alfred Dreyfus were also absinthe drinkers, linking the drink to cosmopolitan, liberal, unpatriotic elements. For the nationalist right, purging France of absinthe became synonymous with purging it of degenerate, anti-French influences. The tide turned irrevocably on August 28, 1905, in the small Swiss village of Comugny. A drunken laborer named Jean Lanfray, who had consumed 2 glasses of absinthe that day, but also copious amounts of wine, brandy, and crème de menthe, returned home, and in a rage, shot his pregnant wife and 2 children before attempting suicide. The Lanfray murders became an international sensation. The press ignored his colossal overall alcohol intake and focused solely on the absinthe. It was the final, bloody proof the prohibitionists needed. Switzerland moved first, banning absinthe in 1907 in a national referendum. The United States banned it in 1912. But the true prize was France. The fight for France's soul culminated in 1914 as war clouds gathered. The prohibitionist movement made its final, decisive argument: national survival. France needed strong, healthy soldiers, not men enfeebled by absinthism. The drink was framed as a threat to military preparedness, a poison weakening the nation from within on the eve of its greatest trial. The cult of the Green Fairy was cast as a form of internal treason on August 3, 1914, the day before Germany declared war on France. The government issued a decree banning the sale and distribution of absinthe. It was a wartime measure, but it would become permanent. The law of March 16, 1915, formally prohibited the production, sale, and even possession of absinthe in France. The Pernod-Fils distillery in Pontarlier, the heart of the industry, was shuttered overnight. A century-old culture vanished from legal existence. The ban was not universal. It persisted in Spain, the Czech lands, and the United Kingdom, where it had never gained such a notorious foothold. In France and elsewhere, it went underground. Bootleggers produced vile imitations. Absinthe, often made with industrial alcohol, toxic copper sulfate for color, and other dangerous adulterants. These concoctions, far more harmful than the original, fueled the enduring myth of its inherent danger. The real, carefully distilled spirit became a ghost, a memory for aging bohemians. The artistic world mourned. For decades, absinthe lived on only in nostalgic literature and old paintings, a symbol of a lost, more daring, and creatively fertile age. It became the ultimate forbidden fruit, its legend growing in its absence. The bans framed it not as a mere alcoholic beverage, but as something uniquely powerful and threatening. A characterization that, ironically, ensured its myth would never die. The Green Fairy's exile lasted for most of the 20th century. Then, in the 1990s, a combination of scholarship and curiosity sparked a revival. British wine merchant and historian John, the Emperor of Absinthe, Glasheen, began to question the historical narrative. Along with other researchers, he delved into old texts, analyzed pre-ban samples found in museums, and deconstructed the propaganda. Their conclusion was revolutionary. Historical absinthe contained relatively low levels of thujone. The cases of absinthism were almost certainly extreme chronic alcoholism, compounded by poverty, malnutrition, and often toxic bootleg substitutes. The bans were the result of a perfect storm of social panic, economic protectionism, and junk science. Armed with this evidence, enthusiasts began to petition governments. They argued that the ban was based on a fallacy. In 1998, the European Union standardized thujone limits in alcoholic beverages, effectively providing a legal pathway for the reintroduction of wormwood-based spirits. The first country to fully legalize was its birthplace, Switzerland, in 2005. France, protectively, only allowed the term absinthe to be used again in 2011, after immense pressure from historians and the distillers of Pontarlier. The modern revival is a tale of two paths. On one hand, there is the return of traditional, high-quality, artisan absinthe, made according to historical recipes and the meticulous French method of distillation. These verte and blanche absinthes are complex, herbal, and meant for the slow, ritualistic louche. They are a conscious reclamation of a lost craft. On the other, there is the commercial exploitation of the myth. Cheap, often artificially colored and flavored spirits from Eastern Europe, marketed with Gothic imagery and promises of legal highs, flooded the market in the early 2000s. They bore little resemblance to the historical drink, but cashed in on its naughty reputation. This created a new generation of confusion, but also interest. The science is now clear. Modern studies show the thujone in properly distilled absinthe, even pre-ban versions, is too low to cause significant psychoactive effects beyond those of its high alcohol content. The lucid drunkenness and hallucinations were likely the result of expectation, the power of ritual, and, in cases of extreme abuse, severe alcohol intoxication. The green fairy was not a pharmacological demon, but a powerful cultural construct, a mirror held up to society's fears and desires. So, what was absinthe? A drink, certainly, but also a canvas for the artists of Montmartre. It was a canvas upon which they projected their ideals of creativity, rebellion, and a rejection of the mundane. It was the liquid form of their derangement of the senses, a tool to see the world in new, swirling, vivid colors for the moralists and the wine lobby. It was a canvas upon which they painted their fears of social change, urban decay, and the erosion of traditional values. It became a convenient scapegoat for complex social ills. For the modern world, it is a canvas for our romanticism of the past, our fascination with forbidden knowledge, and our ongoing negotiation between vice and virtue, freedom and control. The story of absinthe is the story of the fin de cycle itself, a period of breathtaking artistic innovation and profound social anxiety, of glittering beauty and crushing poverty, of a world straining toward the modern while clinging to old ghosts. It fueled masterpieces and madness, sparked revolutions in art, and ultimately provoked a revolution in law. It was a poison and a sacrament, a common vice and an elite ritual, a medical cure and a societal disease. The glass may have been emptied, banned, and hidden away for a century, but the ghost of the green fairy never truly left. She remains, hovering in the haze of a Degas painting, in the swirling brushstrokes of a Van Gogh, in the bittersweet verse of a Rimbaud, and now, once more, in the opalescent louche of a glass, in a quiet bar, she is a reminder that sometimes the most potent spirits are not those we drink, but those we invent.